The desert heat shimmered across the Nevada test range as Morgan Shepherd stepped from the Black Hawk helicopter, her auburn hair whipping in the rotor wash. At just 5'4" and with a slender build that made her tactical gear look oversized, she seemed almost comically out of place among the towering Navy SEALs waiting on the landing zone. But the hard-sided case she carried with careful precision told a different story, one that would soon force America's most elite warriors to reconsider everything they thought they knew about long-distance shooting. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Unbelievable, muttered Commander Jackson as he scanned her credentials. They sent us a civilian contractor for advanced ballistics support. We requested a military specialist from Quantico. Morgan felt the familiar weight of judgment settle across her shoulders. She'd experienced it countless times during her 8 years working with military snipers. The immediate dismissal, the assumption of incompetence, the skepticism that bordered on contempt. Her transfer documents described her simply as technical ballistic consultant with clearance for classified operations. What those papers didn't mention was her pioneering work in extreme-range ballistics with the shadowy government unit known only as Division 0. "Sir, I have the necessary clearances and expertise for this assignment," Morgan said, her voice calm and professional despite the commander's obvious disdain. "The Joint Chiefs specifically requested my assistance for your upcoming operation." Commander Jackson handed back her credentials with barely disguised skepticism. "Fine. Stow your gear in Barrett C. Briefing at 0600 tomorrow. Don't expect special treatment because you're a civilian." He turned to a nearby SEAL. "Mitchell, show her where to go, then get back to training." Lieutenant Mitchell nodded and gestured for Morgan to follow. Unlike his commander, Mitchell's expression held more curiosity than contempt. "So you're the ballistics expert they sent?" "Never worked with a civilian specialist before." "Most haven't," Morgan replied, shouldering her personal bag while keeping a firm grip on her equipment case. The Nevada sun beat down mercilessly as they walked across the base, the distant mountains shimmering like mirages on the horizon. The isolated training facility was legendary among military circles, the place where the impossible became possible through rigorous training and cutting-edge technology. "What's in the case?" Mitchell asked, nodding toward the hard-sided container that Morgan carried with such care. "Custom atmospheric analysis equipment," she replied. "Specialized tools for reading environmental conditions at extreme distances." Mitchell raised an eyebrow. "For calculating bullet trajectories, we have military-grade ballistic computers for that." "The computers are only as good as their programming," Morgan said. "At ranges beyond 2,000 meters, standard algorithms break down. Environmental factors become exponentially more complex." They arrived at Barracks C, a utilitarian building that stood apart from the main SEAL quarters. "Your bunk is inside," Mitchell said. "The armory is restricted, but you'll get access tomorrow after security processes your credentials. Mess hall is open from 0500 to 2100. "Thank you, Lieutenant," Morgan said, and Mitchell nodded before heading back to his duties. The barracks were Spartan but functional. A single bunk, metal locker, and small desk. Morgan placed her equipment case carefully on the desk before unpacking her personal items. Unlike the SEALs, who decorated their spaces with family photos and personal mementos, Morgan arranged technical manuals on advanced ballistics, atmospheric physics, and custom-modified rifle systems. Her notebooks contained handwritten calculations and observations from hundreds of long-range shots, a private record of achievements that official reports would never acknowledge. As she organized her materials, the door opened and a woman in army fatigues entered. "You must be the civilian consultant everyone's talking about," she said, extending her hand. "Staff Sergeant Olivia Reyes, communications specialist. Looks like we're bunkmates." Morgan shook her hand. "Morgan Shepherd. Ballistic support." Reyes glanced at the technical manuals with interest. "Those aren't standard issue. Pretty advanced stuff." "I like to understand the science behind the shot," Morgan replied. "Environmental factors, bullet dynamics, atmospheric interference. It all matters at extreme range. You must be here for Operation Longshot, Reyes said, lowering her voice slightly. The SEALs have been preparing for weeks, some kind of impossible shot they need for an upcoming mission. Morgan nodded but offered no details. Classification protocols were second nature after years working with special operations units. Just here to provide technical support when needed. Well, good luck with that crew, Reyes said with a knowing smile. The SEALs are the best of the best, but they don't exactly welcome outsiders. Especially civilian outsiders. Especially female civilian outsiders. I'm used to it, Morgan replied simply. That evening in the mess hall, Morgan sat alone, observing the social dynamics around her. The SEALs occupied tables near the center of the room, their easy camaraderie evident in their relaxed postures and occasional bursts of laughter. Other support personnel, communication specialists, intelligence analysts, medical staff, clustered at peripheral tables, maintaining a respectful distance from the operators. Preparing and narrating the story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Commander Jackson entered with Lieutenant Mitchell and several other senior SEALs. Their conversation died immediately when they spotted Morgan. Jackson whispered something that made the others chuckle, and Morgan pretended not to notice. She'd learned long ago that first impressions rarely change through confrontation. As she ate, she caught fragments of conversations about the upcoming operation. Phrases like beyond maximum effective range and environmental nightmare confirmed her suspicions about why she'd been summoned to this remote facility. Someone needed an impossible shot, and conventional military expertise wasn't sufficient. Mind if I join you? Morgan looked up to see a tall, broad-shouldered SEAL standing beside her table, tray in hand. His name tape identified him as Peterson. Please, she gestured to the empty seat across from her. Peterson sat down with the fluid grace of someone completely comfortable in his own body. Word is you're some kind of ballistics genius, he said without preamble. That true? I have specialized training in extreme-range ballistic calculation, Morgan replied carefully. Specialized training? Peterson repeated with a slight smile. Heard that before. Every contractor who comes through here has specialized training. Then they can't deliver when it matters. Morgan continued eating without responding to the provocation. We're attempting something tomorrow that's never been done before, Peterson continued. A shot at 200 meters in desert conditions. Temperature variances. Unpredictable winds. Humidity changes. The ballistic computers say it's impossible. Computers can only calculate what they're programmed to understand, Morgan said quietly. Peterson leaned forward. You saying you know better than military-grade technology? I'm saying that computers don't account for micro-atmospheric variations that occur in layered environments like desert basins. They don't factor how thermal currents create invisible tunnels that can guide or deflect projectiles at extreme distances. They don't understand how minute pressure changes affect bullet stability beyond 500 meters. Peterson studied her with new interest. You've made shots like this before. It wasn't a question, but Morgan answered anyway. I've helped others make them. My job is technical support, not trigger pulling. Tomorrow's demonstration is crucial, Peterson said, his voice dropping. We have a mission that depends on this capability. If we can't prove it's possible here, the operation gets scrubbed. Morgan nodded, understanding the stakes. Special operations missions often hinged on seemingly impossible technical requirements. Her work with Division 0 had been precisely about making those requirements achievable. I should warn you, Peterson added as he stood to leave. Commander Jackson doesn't believe any shot beyond 800 meters is reliably possible. He thinks this whole exercise is a waste of resources. And he especially doesn't think a civilian consultant is going to prove him wrong. Thanks for the warning, Morgan replied. Later that night, while Reyes slept, Morgan reviewed atmospheric data for the test range. The Nevada desert presented unique challenges for extreme-range shooting, heat shimmer that distorted optical sighting, sudden microbursts of wind that could push bullets off course, temperature gradients that created invisible barriers to projectile travel. But these were challenges she understood intimately. During her time with Division 0, She'd developed techniques for reading atmospheric conditions that went beyond conventional military methodology. Where traditional snipers relied on technology and standardized calculations, Morgan had learned to interpret environmental cues that most experts never noticed. The way certain dust particles moved in thermal currents, how light refracted differently through varying air densities, subtle changes in vegetation movement that revealed wind patterns invisible to electronic sensors. She made notes in her specialized journal, preparing for the next day's demonstration. Not for the first time, she reflected on the irony of her situation. Military protocol and physical standards meant she would never qualify as a sniper herself, despite possessing knowledge that made impossible shots achievable. Her contributions would always remain in the background, unacknowledged except by the few who understood what she brought to the table. The desert night grew quiet outside her window. In the distance, Morgan could see the silhouette of the mountain range where tomorrow's demonstration would take place. Somewhere out there, a target waited at 200 meters, a distance considered beyond reliable accuracy by most military standards. A shot that conventional wisdom said couldn't be made consistently, especially not in variable desert conditions. Morgan closed her notebook and prepared for sleep. Tomorrow would bring the familiar challenge of proving her worth to people programmed to dismiss her on sight. But she'd faced that challenge before, and would likely face it again. In her world, results spoke louder than appearances, and expertise eventually outweighed prejudice. Whether Commander Jackson and his SEALs recognized her value immediately wasn't important. What mattered was making the impossible possible when it counted. And Morgan Shepherd had spent her entire career doing exactly that. The next morning arrived with the harsh clarity that only desert dawns can deliver. Morgan was already awake at 0430, reviewing her atmospheric calculations one final time before heading to the mess hall. She ate quickly and alone, then made her way to the command center where the briefing would take place. When she arrived, the SEALs were already assembled, 15 operators in tactical gear, their faces impassive as Commander Jackson outlined the day's objectives. Morgan took a seat in the back, her equipment case beside her, and listened. Operation Longshot requires a capability we've never demonstrated before, Jackson explained, pointing to a satellite image displayed on the main screen. A precision shot at 200 meters in variable conditions. Intelligence suggests our target will be accessible only briefly and from extreme distance. If we can't prove the shot is possible here, the entire operation gets scrubbed. He gestured toward the weapon racks where several Barrett .50 caliber rifles were mounted. We've got the best equipment money can buy, top-of-the-line optics, match-grade ammunition, and the finest shooters in the U.S. military. Today's demonstration will determine whether physics is on our side. Only then did Jackson acknowledge Morgan's presence. We also have a civilian consultant with us, he said, his tone making it clear how little he valued her contribution. Ms. Shepherd will be observing and providing technical input. The way he said technical input made it sound like an unnecessary luxury rather than a critical component of success. Morgan kept her expression neutral. She'd heard worse dismissals from men with more impressive credentials. Questions? Jackson asked, looking around the room. Lieutenant Mitchell raised his hand. Sir, what are the specific environmental challenges we're facing today? Temperature range of 40 degrees from morning to afternoon. Wind gusts up to 30 miles per hour with unpredictable direction changes. Heat shimmer that will distort target acquisition beyond 500 meters. And potential dust devil formation in the target valley. Jackson's face was grim. In other words, a worst-case scenario for extreme-range shooting. Exactly what our operators might face in the actual mission. Morgan listened with growing concern. These were precisely the conditions that defeated conventional shooting methodology. Standard ballistic calculations wouldn't account for the complex atmospheric interference they would encounter. The briefing concluded, and the team moved to the transport vehicles that would take them to the test range. Morgan found herself sharing a Humvee with Peterson, Mitchell, and 2 other SEALs whose name tapes identified them as Wilson and Ramirez. So Wilson said as they bounced along the rough desert road, "You really think anyone can hit a target at 200 meters consistently?" "Under controlled conditions with proper environmental analysis, yes," Morgan replied. "Controlled conditions," Ramirez repeated skeptically. We don't exactly operate in controlled conditions. That's not what she means, Peterson interjected. She's talking about controlling for environmental variables, not operating in a laboratory. Morgan nodded. Exactly. Understanding the invisible factors that affect bullet trajectory and compensating for them appropriately. With computer calculations? Mitchell asked. Computers help, Morgan said, but they're limited by their programming. At extreme distances, you need to read conditions that standard sensors can't detect. The Humvee crested a ridge, and the test range came into view below them, a vast expanse of desert basin surrounded by rocky outcroppings. In the far distance, barely visible even through binoculars, Morgan could see the target area where steel plates had been positioned at various ranges. The furthest, at 200 meters, would be the focus of today's demonstration. When they arrived at the firing position, the SEALs immediately began setting up their equipment. Barrett 50 caliber rifles were mounted on stable platforms, advanced spotting scopes were calibrated, and ballistic computers were programmed with initial environmental data. Morgan unpacked her own equipment, specialized atmospheric analysis tools that looked nothing like standard military gear. Her hand-built sensors were designed to detect minute changes in air density, thermal variations, and wind patterns that conventional instruments missed. "What the hell is that?" Commander Jackson asked, approaching her position. "Custom environmental analysis equipment," Morgan replied, continuing her setup. "It measures atmospheric factors that affect extreme-range ballistics." Jackson frowned. "We have military-grade weather stations and ballistic computers." "With respect, Commander, standard equipment doesn't detect micro-atmospheric layers or thermal boundaries that form in desert basins. At 200 meters, those factors become critical." Jackson looked unconvinced but moved on to check on his team's preparations. Morgan continued setting up her equipment, methodically placing sensors and calibrating her custom instruments. She worked with the focused precision that had become her hallmark during years of supporting impossible shots. "You really think that stuff makes a difference?" Lieutenant Mitchell had approached without her noticing. "I know it does," Morgan replied without looking up from her calibrations. "At extreme distances, invisible atmospheric factors create what amounts to an obstacle course for the bullet. Standard calculations assume consistent conditions along the flight path, but reality is far more complex." Mitchell watched her work with undisguised curiosity. "Where did you learn all this?" "This isn't standard military training." Morgan paused briefly. "I worked with a specialized unit that required shots beyond conventional parameters. We developed techniques that aren't in any manual." "This specialized unit have a name," Mitchell pressed. "Nothing you'd find in any official documentation," Morgan replied, returning to her work. The morning progressed with preliminary shots at shorter distances. The SEALs demonstrated their exceptional marksmanship skills, consistently hitting targets at 1,000 meters, then 500, then 2,000. But as the distances increased, the environmental factors Morgan had warned about began to affect accuracy. At 500 meters, even the best shooters were struggling to maintain consistency. The desert heat had created thermal layers that standard ballistic computers couldn't account for. Wind patterns were changing unpredictably, and heat shimmer was distorting target acquisition through conventional optics. Commander Jackson grew increasingly frustrated as his top marksmen missed shots they should have made. "Check the rifle calibration," he ordered after a particularly surprising miss. The mission hanging in the balance was too important to sacrifice to pride or protocol. "Miss Shepard," he said finally, turning to Morgan with visible reluctance, "what exactly are you proposing?" Morgan recognized the moment for what it was. Not acceptance, but desperate necessity. "My equipment detects atmospheric layers that standard sensors miss. I can provide calculations that account for thermal boundaries, density variations, and complex wind patterns that affect bullet trajectory at extreme distances. And you think this will make the 200-meter shot possible?" Jackson's skepticism was evident, but so was his growing desperation. "I know it will," Morgan replied with quiet confidence, "because I've done it before." The commander studied her for a long moment, weighing options that all seemed unpalatable. Finally, he nodded curtly. "Peterson, Work with Miss Shepard on the demonstration shot. The rest of you, continue practice at 500 meters using standard protocols." As Jackson walked away, Peterson turned to Morgan with newfound respect. "All right, let's see what you've got." Morgan immediately began sharing her atmospheric readings, explaining what conventional sensors were missing. There's a thermal layer at 800 meters creating a density boundary, another at 700 meters causing leftward drift. Wind is moving in 3 different directions at various altitudes, creating what amounts to a slalom course for the bullet. Peterson listened intently, his skepticism fading as Morgan's detailed analysis revealed environmental factors he'd sensed intuitively but couldn't quantify. "So how do we compensate?" "We don't fight the atmosphere," Morgan explained, echoing wisdom her mentor had taught her years ago. "We read it and work with it. The thermal currents that push bullets off course can also guide them to target if you understand their patterns." For the next hour, Morgan guided Peterson through her methodology, teaching him to interpret atmospheric conditions in ways his military training had never covered. She showed him how to recognize thermal boundaries through subtle visual cues, how to detect wind patterns that standard indicators missed, how to feel pressure changes that affected bullet stability. "This is incredible," Peterson admitted as they worked. "Why isn't this part of standard sniper training?" "Because it's difficult to quantify and impossible to program," Morgan replied. "It requires environmental intuition that develops through experience, not calculations that fit into neat algorithms." As they prepared for the demonstration shot, Morgan noticed a convoy of vehicles approaching in the distance. "The observers are arriving," she noted. Peterson nodded grimly. "One shot to prove the capability. No pressure." The observers, 3 generals and several senior intelligence officers, arrived with the formal gravity of men accustomed to command. They exchanged brief greetings with Commander Jackson before taking positions at the observation area, their expectations evident in their somber expressions. "Gentlemen," Jackson began, addressing the observers, "today we'll be demonstrating extreme range precision capability in support of Operation Longshot. The target is positioned at 200 meters, a distance that pushes the boundaries of current ballistic science." Morgan stood slightly apart from the main group, continuing her atmospheric analysis while Jackson conducted the formal briefing. Her readings showed conditions were marginally improving as evening approached, but the shot would still require compensation for factors that standard ballistic computers couldn't detect. "Our top marksman, Chief Petty Officer Peterson, will be making the attempt," Jackson continued, "with environmental analysis support from Ms. Shepard, a civilian technical consultant." The observers glanced at Morgan with the reflexive skepticism she'd encountered throughout her career. A small woman in civilian clothing didn't match their concept of advanced military capability. "Ms. Shepard," one of the generals said, "I understand you're providing specialized environmental analysis. Can you explain what that entails?" Morgan approached respectfully. "Sir, at extreme distances, atmospheric conditions create complex interference patterns that standard sensors can't detect. My equipment identifies thermal boundaries, density variations, and wind patterns that affect bullet trajectory beyond 500 meters." The general nodded, though his expression suggested he remained unconvinced. "And you believe this makes a consistent shot at 200 meters possible?" "Yes, sir, with proper analysis and execution." The observers exchanged glances that communicated clear skepticism, but they gestured for the demonstration to proceed. The tension on the range was palpable as Peterson took his position behind the Barrett .50 caliber rifle. The target at 200 meters was barely visible through his scope, a steel plate that appeared as little more than a distant speck against the mountain backdrop. "Ready when you are?" Peterson said quietly to Morgan, who was studying her final atmospheric readings. "Surface wind from northwest at 12 miles per hour, Morgan began, her voice calm and methodical. "Thermal boundary at 800 meters creating upward drift. Density change at 700 meters pushing left. High altitude crosswind from southeast at 900 meters. Peterson made adjustments to his scope based on her readings, though the changes contradicted what the ballistic computer was recommending. The observers watched with undisguised curiosity as Morgan continued providing environmental data that seemed impossibly detailed. Temperature gradient, creating a tunnel effect between 2,000 and 500 meters, she continued. Use it to guide the bullet through the crosswind boundary at 900 meters. Peterson nodded, making final adjustments that incorporated Morgan's analysis. Then he settled into position, controlling his breathing as he prepared for the shot that would determine whether Operation Longshot proceeded or died on the planning table. The range fell completely silent as Peterson squeezed the trigger. The Barrett roared, its massive report echoing across the desert basin as they had-to. 50 caliber round began its journey through 200 meters of complex atmospheric conditions. 6 seconds passed, an eternity during which the bullet traversed invisible thermal boundaries, density variations, and wind patterns that would have defeated conventional calculations. Morgan tracked its probable path in her mind, visualizing the atmospheric layers she'd detected and the bullet's interaction with each one. Then came the spotter's call, clear and unambiguous. Hit! Center mass at 200 meters. Target confirmed. For a moment, no one spoke. The observers stared through their binoculars in disbelief. Commander Jackson's expression shifted from skepticism to amazement. Peterson remained motionless behind his rifle, as if movement might somehow undo what he'd just accomplished. Confirm that, one of the generals ordered, and a second spotter verified the hit. 200 meters, center mass. Direct hit on target. The implications were immediate and significant. A shot that conventional wisdom said couldn't be made consistently had just been demonstrated under challenging conditions. Operation Longshot suddenly had the technical capability it required. Remarkable, the lead general said, lowering his binoculars. I wouldn't have believed it possible in these conditions. The observers gathered around Peterson, offering congratulations on his exceptional marksmanship. Morgan stepped back, allowing the SEAL his moment of recognition. Her contribution would remain largely invisible, as it had throughout her career. But as the formal proceedings continued, Peterson sought her out. "That was your shot, as much as mine," he said quietly. "I just pulled the trigger. You read conditions I couldn't even see." Morgan smiled slightly. "That's how it works. You have the skills and authority to take the shot. I provide the environmental analysis that makes it possible." "It shouldn't work that way," Peterson replied. "Your expertise deserves recognition." Before Morgan could respond, Commander Jackson approached, his earlier skepticism replaced by reluctant respect. "Miss Shepard, the observers would like a more detailed explanation of your environmental analysis techniques. Apparently, they're interested in potentially incorporating your methods into future training programs." Morgan nodded and followed Jackson to where the generals waited. For the first time since arriving at the facility, she found herself being taken seriously as a technical expert, rather than dismissed as an unnecessary civilian attachment. As the desert sun began its descent toward the western mountains, casting long shadows across the test range, Morgan explained her methodology to men who commanded armies. She described atmospheric factors that standard military training ignored, detailed reading techniques that went beyond conventional sensors, and outlined an approach to extreme-range shooting that challenged established doctrine. The observers listened with growing interest, occasionally exchanging glances that suggested they recognized the significance of what they were hearing. When Morgan finished her explanation, the lead general nodded thoughtfully. "Miss Shepard, I think we need to have a longer conversation about your expertise and how it might benefit our special operations capabilities. This goes beyond a single mission requirement." Morgan recognized the moment for what it was. Not just validation of her personal capabilities, but an opportunity to share knowledge that could save lives and enable operations previously considered impossible. Whether her name appeared in official reports was less important than ensuring her expertise wasn't lost to bureaucratic blindness. As the observers departed and the SEALs began packing their equipment, Morgan felt a sense of quiet satisfaction that had nothing to do with recognition. The impossible shot had been made possible through the marriage of Peterson's marksmanship skills and her environmental analysis. It was exactly the kind of collaboration she'd always believed in, expertise recognized for its value rather than its source. "We're having a team gathering tonight to celebrate the successful demonstration," Peterson said as they loaded equipment into the Humvees. "You should join us." Morgan smiled. "I might do that." As they drove back toward the main facility, the desert twilight painting the landscape in purples and oranges, Morgan reflected on the day's events. The barrier hadn't been the 200 meters or the complex atmospheric conditions. It had been the institutional blindness that valued protocol over expertise and tradition over innovation. That barrier wouldn't fall in a single day or through one successful demonstration, but a small crack had formed, a recognition that sometimes the most valuable knowledge came from unexpected sources. And in Morgan's experience, that was how real change always began. Not through dramatic declarations, but through quiet moments of undeniable capability. The desert stars emerged above them, countless points of light in the vast darkness. Somewhere in that vastness was another impossible target waiting to be reached, another barrier of distance and physics and doubt to be overcome. Morgan Shepherd would be ready when that moment came, armed with knowledge that transcended conventional limitations and patience that outlasted institutional resistance. Because the most important shots were always the ones that changed not just missions but mindsets, and those were the shots worth traveling 3,200 meters to make. The next morning, Morgan awoke to find the SEAL facility transformed. Word of the impossible shot had spread throughout the base overnight, creating a ripple effect that altered how everyone viewed both the mission and the unassuming civilian consultant who had made it possible. When she entered the mess hall, conversations paused momentarily as operators and support personnel alike took notice of her presence. Unlike yesterday's isolation, Morgan found herself approached by SEALs with technical questions about environmental analysis and long-range ballistics. "There she is," Peterson called out, waving her over to a table where several team members were gathered. "The woman who reads invisible air." Morgan smiled slightly at the description as she joined them. It wasn't entirely inaccurate. Her expertise did involve detecting atmospheric conditions others couldn't perceive. "That was impressive work yesterday," said Wilson, who had been skeptical during their initial Humvee ride. "I've never seen anyone read conditions like that." "How did you develop those techniques?" asked Ramirez. "That's not standard military training." Morgan considered how much to reveal about her background. Classification protocols limited what she could share, but educational principles weren't classified. It started with understanding that atmospheric conditions aren't obstacles to overcome, but information to interpret, she explained. Most marksmanship training treats the environment as the enemy, wind to fight, temperature to compensate for. But when you start viewing those factors as a dynamic system you can read and utilize, impossible shots become predictable. "Like surfing a wave instead of fighting the current," Mitchell suggested. "Exactly," Morgan nodded. "The atmosphere between you and the target is constantly moving, shifting, creating pathways. If you fight it, you lose. If you read it correctly, it can actually guide your bullet to target." As they discussed technical aspects of extreme-range shooting, Morgan noticed Commander Jackson watching from across the room. His expression had shifted from yesterday's dismissive skepticism to something more complex, reluctant respect, tinged with institutional concern. The successful demonstration had validated Morgan's expertise, but also challenged the military training paradigm Jackson represented. After breakfast, Morgan was summoned to a briefing with the command team. She arrived to find Jackson, Mitchell, and several senior officers gathered around a tactical display showing a mountainous region she didn't recognize. "Miss Shepherd," Jackson began formally, "in light of yesterday's demonstration, we're incorporating your environmental analysis techniques into operational planning for Longshot. The mission parameters have been adjusted to utilize your expertise." Morgan recognized this for the significant concession it was. Military operations weren't easily modified, especially to accommodate civilian input. "I'm happy to provide whatever support is needed," she replied professionally. Jackson nodded, then gestured to the tactical display. "The operation involves eliminating a high-value target in extremely challenging terrain. The only viable shooting position is 100 meters from the target location, similar to yesterday's demonstration but with added complications." The display showed a rugged mountain valley with severe elevation changes, complex terrain features, and a climate system that would create unpredictable atmospheric conditions. "The environmental factors are significantly more complex than our test range," Mitchell added. "Multiple elevation changes creating unpredictable thermals, canyon winds that shift direction hourly, humidity variations from nearby water sources." Morgan studied the topographical data, already identifying atmospheric challenges that standard military methodology wouldn't account for. "The valley creates a vortex effect," she noted. "Air currents moving in circular patterns rather than linear flows. That would make conventional wind reading essentially useless." Jackson nodded grimly. Which is why yesterday's demonstration was so critical. Standard calculations say this shot can't be made reliably. It can be made, Morgan said with quiet confidence, but it requires reading environmental conditions that most sensors won't detect. That's why we need you on site for the operation, Jackson said, watching her carefully for reaction. Not just providing pre-mission analysis, but real-time environmental reading during execution. Morgan looked up from the display, surprised by the request. Civilian technical consultants typically provided support during planning phases, but rarely deployed on actual operations. That's unusual protocol, Commander. This is an unusual operation, Jackson replied. The Joint Chiefs have authorized your field deployment as essential technical support. Your presence has been deemed mission-critical based on yesterday's demonstration. The implications were significant. Morgan would be accompanying a SEAL team into a combat zone, providing the environmental expertise necessary for an impossible shot that standard military training couldn't support. When do we deploy? She asked simply. 48 hours, Jackson answered. We'll spend today and tomorrow in intensive preparation. Peterson will be primary shooter with Mitchell as backup. You'll work directly with both to develop environmental reading protocols specific to the target region. As the briefing continued, Morgan absorbed operational details while considering what this deployment represented, not just for the mission, but for military doctrine. Her inclusion signified recognition that some technical capabilities transcended conventional training and certification. Expertise was being valued above protocol, at least for this critical operation. After the briefing, Morgan found herself working closely with Peterson and Mitchell in a specialized training area designed to simulate the target environment. The facility used advanced climate control systems to replicate wind patterns, temperature variations, and humidity changes the team would encounter during the actual operation. The key challenge is the layered atmosphere in mountain valleys, Morgan explained as they practiced reading environmental cues. You get cold air trapped beneath warm currents, creating invisible boundaries that deflect bullets unpredictably. Peterson nodded, absorbing her methodology with remarkable adaptability, like shooting through water with different density layers. Exactly, Morgan confirmed. Standard ballistic calculations assume consistent air density along the bullet path. Reality is far more complex, especially in mountain terrain. Throughout the day, Morgan taught techniques that went beyond her conventional military training. Methods for detecting thermal boundaries through subtle visual cues, ways to read vegetation movement that revealed wind patterns invisible to electronic sensors, approaches to interpreting light refraction that indicated density changes in the atmosphere. This is revolutionary, Mitchell commented during a brief break. Why isn't this standard in advanced sniper training? Because it's difficult to systematize, Morgan replied honestly. It combines science with intuition developed through experience. You can't program it into algorithms or reduce it to standardized procedures. Which is exactly why military doctrine tends to ignore it. Peterson added with unusual insight. The system values predictable protocols over specialized expertise. Morgan nodded, appreciating his understanding. Institutional knowledge preferring quantifiable methods is understandable. Combat operations require reliability, but at extreme ranges, the quantifiable methods break down, and intuitive expertise becomes essential. As the day progressed, Morgan was impressed by how quickly both SEALs adapted to her methodology. Peterson in particular showed natural talent for environmental reading that went beyond his formal training. By late afternoon, he was detecting atmospheric conditions that most trained observers would miss entirely. You have an intuitive understanding of air dynamics, Morgan told him during their final practice session. You're feeling environmental changes before consciously registering them. Peterson seemed surprised by the observation. I've always had a sense for how air moves. Previous instructors called it good instincts, but they never explained what I was actually sensing. You're reading micro-atmospheric cues subconsciously, Morgan explained. That's exactly the capability we need for this operation. Their training was interrupted when Commander Jackson arrived with an intelligence officer Morgan hadn't met before. The officer carried a secure tablet displaying satellite imagery of the target region. We have updated environmental data, Jackson announced. Weather patterns in the target region are deteriorating. Atmospheric conditions will be even more challenging than we initially projected. The intelligence officer brought up meteorological data showing complex storm systems converging on the mountain valley, multiple pressure fronts creating unpredictable wind patterns. temperature variances of up to 30 degrees within the canyon system, humidity fluctuations from nearby water sources. Morgan studied the data with growing concern. These conditions would challenge even the advanced techniques she'd been teaching. The convergence of these systems creates what amounts to atmospheric turbulence, she noted, multiple layers moving in different directions simultaneously. Can the shot still be made? Jackson asked directly. Morgan considered the question carefully, analyzing the environmental data against her experience with similar conditions. Yes, she said finally, but it requires reading the atmosphere as a dynamic system rather than a static obstacle. The convergence points between air masses create pathways that can guide the bullet if properly utilized. Jackson nodded, though his expression revealed lingering doubt. The mission proceeds as planned. We deploy at 0600 tomorrow for final on-site preparation. After the commander departed, Peterson turned to Morgan. You said yes awfully quickly. Those conditions look nearly impossible. They're challenging, Morgan acknowledged, but not impossible. We've made shots in similar environments before. We? Mitchell asked, catching the plural reference. Morgan hesitated, then decided limited transparency would build the trust necessary for mission success. The unit I worked with previously specialized in seemingly impossible shots. We developed techniques specifically for environmental conditions that defeated conventional methodology. This mysterious unit have a name? Peterson pressed gently. Nothing you'd find in official records, Morgan replied. But the principles we developed are what matter, not the organizational structure. That evening, as Morgan prepared her equipment for deployment, Staff Sergeant Reyes entered their shared quarters with obvious curiosity. Word around base is you're deploying with the SEAL team, she said, sitting on her bunk. That's unprecedented for a civilian consultant. Morgan continued her methodical equipment check without looking up. The mission has unique technical requirements. Must be something special for Jackson to bring in outside expertise, Reyes observed. He's known for being strictly by-the-book military. Sometimes the book doesn't cover everything, Morgan replied. Reyes studied her with growing interest. You know, when you arrived, everyone assumed you were just another contractor with inflated credentials. Now they're saying you read air currents like some kind of atmospheric psychic. Morgan smiled slightly at the description. Not psychic. Just experienced in detecting conditions most people overlook. Where does someone get that kind of experience? Reyes asked. That's not standard training anywhere in the military or private sector. Morgan considered how to answer without violating security protocols. When conventional methods fail consistently enough, you're forced to develop alternatives. My previous work required shots that standard ballistic science said were impossible. With this Division 0 people keep whispering about? Reyes asked directly. Morgan's expression remained neutral, but internally she was surprised the classified unit's name had leaked into base conversation. I can't confirm or deny specific organizational affiliations. Reyes nodded, understanding the boundaries of classified information. Well, whatever you did before, it's impressed the hell out of Jackson and his team. And that doesn't happen easily. Later that night, alone with her thoughts, Morgan reviewed technical data for the target region while considering the larger implications of her deployment. Division 0 had operated in shadows, its achievements unacknowledged, except by the few who understood what impossible shots really meant for military capability. Now, however temporarily, that expertise was being recognized and integrated into conventional operations. It represented a small but significant shift in how specialized knowledge was valued within military structures. The question was whether this mission would become an isolated exception or the beginning of doctrinal evolution. The desert night fell silent outside her window as Morgan completed her preparations. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities, not just for mission success, but for demonstrating that some barriers existed only because institutional thinking hadn't evolved to overcome them. In her experience, the most important shots weren't just the ones that reached impossible targets. They were the ones that changed how people thought about what was possible in the first place. Morning arrived with the controlled chaos of pre-deployment operations. Morgan joined the SEAL team at the armory, where Peterson was meticulously checking his Barrett .50 caliber rifle, while other operators prepared tactical gear for the mission. The atmosphere was focused and professional, with none of yesterday's skepticism about her presence. Miss Shepard. Commander Jackson approached, offering a tactical vest, standard protective equipment for deployment. I've also authorized this for your use. He handed her a specialized communications headset designed for secure tactical operations. Morgan recognized the significance of being integrated into the team's communications network. It represented not just physical inclusion in the operation, but informational trust. "Thank you, Commander," she said, accepting both items. "I've packed my environmental analysis equipment in impact-resistant cases as requested." Jackson nodded approvingly. "Mitchell will be your direct tactical escort throughout the operation. Your safety is a mission priority." He hesitated, then added with unexpected candor, "Your expertise has been deemed irreplaceable for this operation." The acknowledgement, however reluctant, represented significant evolution from his initial dismissal of her capabilities. Morgan understood it wasn't personal acceptance, but professional recognition of essential skills. "I'll provide whatever support the team needs," she replied simply. Transport to the forward operating base was conducted via Osprey aircraft, the hybrid plane helicopter carrying the SEAL team and essential support personnel over hundreds of miles of rugged terrain. Morgan sat between Peterson and Mitchell, reviewing satellite imagery of the target region on a secure tablet. "The valley creates what amounts to an atmospheric river," she explained, pointing to topographical features. "Air currents flow through it like water, creating eddies and currents that affect bullet trajectory unpredictably." "How do you compensate for that?" Mitchell asked. "You don't fight the current," Morgan replied, echoing wisdom her mentor had taught years ago. "You read it and use it to guide your shot." The same atmospheric turbulence that makes standard calculations useless creates pathways that can be utilized if properly understood. Peterson nodded thoughtfully, "Like finding the channel in a rushing river." "Exactly," Morgan confirmed. "There are paths of least resistance in turbulent air, just as there are in turbulent water. The key is identifying them in real time." The Osprey landed at a forward operating base nestled in mountains that made the Nevada test range look tame by comparison. Rugged peaks surrounded a narrow valley where military personnel moved with the focused efficiency of a combat deployment. Intelligence officers briefed the team immediately upon arrival, updating mission parameters based on latest surveillance. "The target will be accessible for approximately 90 seconds tomorrow at 0945 hours, the lead intelligence officer explained. "The only viable shooting position is here." He indicated a rocky outcropping on the tactical display. 100 meters from the target location with severe elevation changes and complex atmospheric conditions. Morgan studied the environmental data with growing concern. The conditions were even more challenging than the simulations had suggested. Multiple air masses converging in the valley, creating turbulence that would defeat standard ballistic calculations entirely. "We'll need to establish the shooting position today for environmental observation," she said. "I need at least 12 hours of atmospheric data to establish patterns." Commander Jackson nodded. "A forward team will escort you to the position in 1 hour. You'll have until mission execution for preparation." The shooting position proved even more challenging than satellite imagery had suggested. Perched on a rocky outcropping with a sheer drop on 3 sides, it offered the only clear line of sight to the target location 100 meters away. But the atmospheric conditions between were dauntingly complex, swirling winds visible in vegetation movement, temperature variations creating heat shimmer that distorted visibility, and humidity changes that would affect bullet stability unpredictably. Morgan immediately began setting up her specialized equipment, positioning sensors to detect atmospheric factors invisible to standard military gear. Peterson and Mitchell established the shooting platform, while tactical team members secured the perimeter. "These conditions are worse than anything we practiced," Peterson observed quietly as he calibrated his scope. "Multiple wind directions visible simultaneously." "The valley creates vortex effects," Morgan confirmed, studying her readings. "But there are patterns within the chaos. We have until tomorrow to map them." Throughout the afternoon and into evening, Morgan methodically collected atmospheric data, identifying patterns that would have been meaningless to conventional observers. She tracked how air masses moved through the valley at different times, how temperature changes created temporary pathways of stable air, how moisture from nearby water sources affected density in predictable cycles. "It's like watching invisible rivers flowing through the air," Mitchell commented as Morgan explained what her readings were revealing, currents and eddies that standard sensors can't detect. "That's exactly what it is," Morgan confirmed. Air behaves like fluid dynamics at this scale, especially in confined topography like mountain valleys. As night fell, Morgan continued her observations using specialized thermal equipment that revealed temperature variations invisible to the naked eye. The patterns were complex but increasingly predictable, rhythmic cycles of atmospheric movement created by the valley's unique topography. Peterson joined her during the midnight observation shift, his interest in her methodology evolving from professional necessity to genuine intellectual curiosity. "You said earlier that you've made shots in conditions like this before," he noted. "With your previous unit." Morgan nodded, continuing her readings. "Similar conditions, yes. Mountain valleys create unique atmospheric challenges that defeat conventional ballistic calculations." "But you weren't just calculating for others," Peterson said carefully. "You've taken these shots yourself, haven't you?" The question hung in the mountain air between them. Morgan paused her work, considering how to respond without violating security protocols. "Division 0 operated differently than conventional military units," she said finally. "Technical expertise was valued above traditional qualifications. Sometimes that meant analysts became operators when missions required it." Peterson absorbed this revelation thoughtfully. "So you're not just a technical consultant. You're a shooter who never received official recognition because of bureaucratic restrictions." "My official role was environmental analysis," Morgan replied diplomatically. "Who pulled the trigger was less important than making impossible shots possible." "But it was you sometimes," Peterson pressed gently. Morgan met his gaze directly. "Sometimes conventional qualification standards prevent the right person from being in the right position." Division 0 prioritized capability over credentials. Peterson nodded slowly, understanding the implications. The military system that defined roles through standardized qualifications sometimes excluded exceptional talent that didn't fit prescribed parameters. "Tomorrow's shot," he said after a moment. "Under these conditions, with what's at stake, who should take it?" Honestly, the question cut to the heart of institutional limitations versus operational necessities. Morgan appreciated his willingness to ask it directly. "You're an exceptional marksman with intuitive understanding of environmental factors," she answered carefully. "With proper atmospheric guidance, you can make this shot successfully." Peterson studied her expression. "That's a diplomatic answer. I'm asking for your professional assessment without regard for protocol or hierarchy." Morgan considered what was really being asked, whether institutional limitations should supersede mission requirements when lives and objectives hung in the balance. "In Division 0, she said finally, "the person with the highest probability of success would take the shot, regardless of official qualifications or rank. That was how we operated." "And in these conditions, with this target," Peterson continued, "who has the highest probability of success?" Morgan met his gaze steadily. "The person with the most experience reading and utilizing complex atmospheric conditions in mountain environments." The unspoken conclusion hung between them, that military protocol might be requiring a good shooter to take a shot that a great shooter was present to make. But challenging established hierarchy wasn't something Morgan took lightly, especially when team cohesion was essential for mission success. "I trust your judgment tomorrow," she said diplomatically. "My job is to provide the environmental analysis that makes success possible, regardless of who pulls the trigger." Peterson nodded, respecting her careful navigation of institutional boundaries while acknowledging the underlying truth they both recognized. As dawn approached, bringing mission execution closer, Morgan completed her final atmospheric analysis. The patterns were dauntingly complex, but increasingly predictable. Cycles of air movement through the valley that created brief windows when stable pathways formed through otherwise turbulent conditions. "There's a pattern that repeats approximately every 42 minutes, she explained to Peterson and Mitchell as they prepared for the mission. "A convergence of air masses creates a temporary corridor of stable atmosphere through the valley. It lasts approximately 30 seconds before dissolving into turbulence again." "And the next window coincides with our target opportunity?" Mitchell asked. Morgan nodded. "Based on my observations, we should have a stable atmospheric corridor at 0947 hours, almost precisely when intelligence indicates the target will be accessible. Meaning we get one shot during a 30-second window," Peterson summarized. "Through 100 meters of mountain air that's stable only because you've identified a pattern no one else could see." "That's correct," Morgan confirmed. "Standard ballistic calculations would be useless under these conditions." We're essentially finding a momentary path through atmospheric turbulence. As mission time approached, the team made final preparations. Commander Jackson arrived with senior officers to observe the operation that could determine military capabilities for years to come. The tension was palpable but controlled. Professional operators preparing for a shot that conventional wisdom said couldn't be made reliably. Morgan continued monitoring atmospheric conditions, tracking the patterns she'd identified throughout the night. The cycle was holding consistent. Every 42 minutes, a brief window of stable air formed through the valley, creating a pathway that would guide a bullet through otherwise impossible conditions. Target area coming active, quote, the intelligence officer reported at exactly 0940 hours. Estimating 90-second window beginning at 0945. Morgan checked her atmospheric readings, confirming the next stability window would form at 0947, creating a critical 30-second overlap when both the target would be accessible and the atmospheric conditions would be optimal. Prepare for shot at exactly 0947 hours, she advised Peterson, who was in position behind the Barrett. We'll have approximately 30 seconds of stable atmospheric conditions. Peterson nodded, making final adjustments to his rifle based on Morgan's environmental data. Commander Jackson and the senior officers watched with professional intensity, understanding that this single shot would validate or invalidate months of operational planning. Target confirmed. The spotter announced at 0945, right on schedule. Distance 3, 100 meters, moving west to east through Sector 4. Morgan monitored her atmospheric sensors with absolute concentration, watching as the pattern she'd tracked throughout the night began its final formation. Air masses were converging exactly as predicted, creating a corridor of stability through otherwise turbulent conditions. Atmospheric corridor forming, she reported at 0946. 30 seconds to optimal conditions. The next 60 seconds would determine whether impossible shots were truly impossible, or merely waiting for someone with the right expertise to make them inevitable. Atmospheric corridor stabilizing, Morgan announced, her voice steady despite the mounting tension. 20 seconds to optimal conditions. Through her specialized sensors, she watched as invisible air currents formed a momentary pathway through the mountain valley, a brief alignment of atmospheric factors that would create a stable trajectory for the bullet's flight. It was a phenomenon that standard military sensors couldn't detect and conventional training didn't acknowledge, yet it would determine whether an impossible shot became possible. 15 seconds, she continued, monitoring subtle shifts in temperature and pressure that would affect the bullet's path. Wind convergence at 200 meters forming as predicted. Peterson remained motionless behind the Barrett. .50 caliber rifle, his breathing controlled and steady as he prepared for a shot that would push the boundaries of what military doctrine considered achievable. Commander Jackson and the senior officers watched in silence, their skepticism temporarily suspended by the methodical precision of Morgan's environmental analysis. 10 seconds to optimal corridor, Morgan reported, her focus absolute as she tracked atmospheric readings that revealed conditions invisible to everyone else present. Prepare for final adjustments. The target area remained active exactly as intelligence had predicted, a high-value objective, momentarily exposed at a distance that conventional military wisdom considered beyond reliable engagement range. 100 meters of complex mountain atmosphere lay between Peterson's position and a target that represented national security implications beyond this single operation. Atmospheric corridor stabilized, Morgan announced at precisely 0947 hours. Optimal conditions for 30 seconds. She provided final adjustments based on real-time atmospheric readings, microscopic changes to elevation and windage that contradicted what standard ballistic computers would recommend, but aligned with the invisible corridor she'd detected through the valley. Thermal boundary at 800 meters creating slight upward drift, she detailed. Crosswind convergence at 400 meters requires 2-minute left adjustment. Humidity barrier at 900 meters affecting terminal velocity. Peterson made the adjustments with fluid precision, integrating Morgan's environmental reading into his marksmanship training. This was the moment where technical expertise and operational capability merged, where the impossible became achievable through the marriage of specialized knowledge and tactical skill. "Send it when ready," Morgan said quietly. "Corridor stable for 20 more seconds." Peterson exhaled slowly, controlling his breathing as he aligned the crosshairs on a target barely visible, even through advanced optics. His finger took up the trigger slack with practiced precision, applying pressure with microscopic control. The Barrett roared, its massive report echoing across the mountain valley as the full .50 caliber round began its journey through 100 meters of atmosphere that would have defeated standard ballistic calculations. The bullet's flight would take nearly 7 seconds, an eternity during which countless atmospheric factors could alter its trajectory. Morgan tracked the invisible corridor in her mind, visualizing the bullet's path through atmospheric layers she'd been mapping throughout the night. The round would encounter thermal boundaries, density variations, and wind patterns that standard sensors couldn't detect, yet she'd accounted for each one in her final adjustments. 6 seconds passed in absolute silence as the team waited for confirmation. The spotter remained focused through his high-powered optics, tracking the target area for impact results. Hit confirmed. The spotter finally announced, his professional tone barely containing his amazement. Direct impact on target. Mission objective achieved. The shooting position erupted in controlled celebration, not the boisterous reaction of sports victory, but the measured satisfaction of professional operators accomplishing something previously considered impossible. Commander Jackson exchanged glances with the senior officers, their expressions conveying the significance of what they'd just witnessed. "Outstanding shot," Jackson said to Peterson, who remained behind his rifle in professional form. "Outstanding environmental analysis," Peterson replied, nodding toward Morgan. "The shot was technically impossible without Ms. Shepard's atmospheric reading." Morgan stepped back, allowing the operators their moment of recognition. Her contribution had made the impossible possible, but in military operations, results mattered more than attribution. The mission had succeeded. A shot that defied conventional limitations had been achieved under conditions that should have made it unreliable. As the team prepared to extract from the position, Commander Jackson approached Morgan directly. "That was remarkable work," he acknowledged. Professional pride temporarily set aside in recognition of exceptional capability. "Your atmospheric analysis was the difference between success and failure." "The team performed excellently," Morgan replied diplomatically. "It was a collaborative achievement." Jackson studied her with new understanding. "You've been making shots like this possible for years without recognition, haven't you?" "With your previous unit." Morgan maintained professional neutrality. "My role has always been technical support, Commander." "The shooters deserve credit for execution." "Technical support that makes impossible shots possible," Jackson noted. "That's more than support. That's mission-critical expertise that our current training doesn't address." Before Morgan could respond, the tactical radio crackled with urgent information. "Extraction route compromised," the team leader reported. "Enemy forces moving into valley positions. Primary exfiltration no longer viable." The mood shifted instantly from success to focused concern. Their hidden position remained secure, but the planned extraction route through the valley was now blocked by hostile forces apparently responding to the operation. "Alternate extraction point is here," Jackson indicated on the tactical map, pointing to a location on the opposite ridge. "But it's exposed to potential observation. We need to move under cover of darkness 6 hours from now." Morgan studied the terrain between their current position and the alternate extraction point. The route would take them through the same complex atmospheric conditions she'd been analyzing for the mission. Conditions that created not just challenges, but potential advantages for those who could read them correctly. "Commander," she said carefully, "the atmospheric patterns I've been tracking could provide concealment during movement. There's a periodic fog formation in the Western Valley that standard sensors aren't detecting. It forms for approximately 40 minutes every 3 hours due to temperature inversions and water vapor from the river system." Jackson looked up with immediate interest. "Natural concealment?" "Yes, sir. Dense enough to prevent visual identification, but thin enough for our team to navigate with thermal equipment. Based on the pattern, the next formation should begin in approximately 20 minutes and last until 1,130 hours. The commander exchanged glances with his senior operators, quickly assessing the tactical implications. "You're certain about this atmospheric prediction?" "I've been tracking the pattern for 12 hours, Morgan confirmed. "It's consistent and predictable despite appearing random to conventional observation." Jackson made a rapid, tactical decision. "We move in 20 minutes, use the natural concealment, to reach the alternate extraction point before enemy forces can establish containment." The team immediately began preparing for movement, stowing equipment and checking tactical gear with the efficient precision of experienced operators. Peterson approached Morgan as she packed her specialized sensors. "That fog prediction could save the entire team," he said quietly. "Another example of reading conditions others can't even detect." Morgan secured her equipment in its impact-resistant case. The atmosphere tells stories if you know how to listen. Most people miss the whispers because they're only trained to hear shouts. Within 20 minutes, the team was ready to move. Exactly as Morgan had predicted, a dense fog began forming in the western valley below their position, an atmospheric phenomenon created by unique temperature and humidity conditions that conventional weather forecasting had missed entirely. "Fog formation confirmed," the point operator reported. Visibility reduced to 20 meters in the valley. Commander Jackson nodded to Morgan with newfound respect before addressing the team. "We move now. Use thermal optics for navigation. Maintain tactical spacing." The descent into the fog-shrouded valley was treacherous but executed with the disciplined precision of elite operators. Morgan moved between Peterson and Mitchell, her civilian status temporarily irrelevant as the team focused on extracting safely from increasingly hostile territory. The fog provided perfect concealment, thick enough to hide their movement from enemy observation but navigable with the team's advanced thermal equipment. What appeared as random weather to conventional forces represented a predictable atmospheric pattern to Morgan, one she'd been tracking throughout her environmental analysis. "Periodic clearing ahead," she warned as they moved through the valley. Fog thins for approximately 60 seconds every 7 minutes due to wind patterns from the eastern ridge. The team leader incorporated this information into their movement plan, halting briefly during each predicted clearing to avoid detection. Morgan's atmospheric reading was proving as valuable for tactical movement as it had been for the impossible shot. "You've got a sixth sense for this," Mitchell commented during a brief pause in their advance, "reading air movements that nobody else can even detect." "Not a sixth sense," Morgan corrected quietly. "Just experience recognizing patterns most people aren't trained to observe." As they navigated through the concealing fog, Morgan reflected on how environmental reading extended beyond ballistics to overall tactical advantage. The same atmospheric conditions that challenged conventional operations could provide unexpected opportunities for those who understood them properly. The team made exceptional progress under fog concealment, covering difficult terrain without detection by hostile forces searching the valley. They reached the alternate extraction point nearly an hour ahead of schedule, establishing security in a defensible position while awaiting helicopter evacuation. "Your atmospheric prediction was spot on," Jackson acknowledged as they prepared for extraction. "That natural concealment was the difference between a compromised exfiltration and a clean escape." Morgan nodded, accepting the professional recognition without embellishment. In operational environments, results mattered more than personal credit, a principle that had defined her entire career with Division 0. The extraction helicopter arrived precisely on schedule, appearing through thinning fog as the atmospheric conditions began shifting exactly as Morgan had predicted. The team boarded efficiently, and within minutes they were airborne, leaving the complex mountain valley behind as they returned to the forward operating base. During the flight, Morgan noticed Peterson engaged in quiet conversation with Commander Jackson, occasionally glancing in her direction. Though she couldn't hear their discussion over the helicopter's noise, their serious expression suggested it concerned more than just the completed mission. When they landed at the forward operating base, the team was immediately ushered into a secure briefing room where senior intelligence officers awaited with unusual urgency. "Outstanding work," the lead intelligence officer began without preamble. "The operation was a complete success with significant strategic implications beyond the immediate objective." Commander Jackson nodded, then unexpectedly turned attention toward Morgan. "That success would have been impossible without Ms. Shepard's environmental analysis capabilities. Her expertise made an allegedly impossible shot achievable and provided tactical advantage during extraction." The intelligence officer studied Morgan with new interest. "So you're the environmental specialist who made this happen. Your reputation from Division 0 precedes you, though officially that unit never existed." Morgan maintained professional composure despite the unusual public reference to her classified background. The room had fallen silent, operators and intelligence personnel alike absorbing the implications of connecting her openly to a program that remained officially unacknowledged. "My role was technical support," she replied diplomatically. The operational team executed flawlessly. Technical support that defied conventional ballistic limitations, the intelligence officer noted. That's precisely why I'm here. Your capabilities have attracted attention at the highest levels. He activated a secure display showing a mountainous region Morgan didn't recognize, terrain even more challenging than the valley they'd just operated in. We have another situation developing that requires similar capabilities, he continued. A critical operation with environmental challenges that conventional methodology can't overcome. We need your expertise specifically. Morgan studied the topographical data with professional interest. The terrain showed extreme elevation changes, complex weather patterns, and atmospheric conditions that would defeat standard ballistic calculations entirely. The target distance is 3,800 meters, the intelligence officer added, allowing the number to register with everyone present. Beyond any confirmed successful engagement in military history. A murmur ran through the assembled operators. 3,800 meters exceeded even the shot they'd just completed by a significant margin, pushing into territory that military doctrine considered theoretically impossible for reliable engagement. Environmental challenges? Morgan asked, already analyzing the topographical data. Multiple climate systems converging. Elevation changes creating unpredictable wind patterns. Temperature variations between valleys and ridges generating complex thermal effects. Every computer model says a precision shot is impossible under these conditions. Morgan nodded thoughtfully. Challenging, certainly, but not necessarily impossible with proper environmental analysis. The intelligence officer exchanged glances with Commander Jackson. That's exactly what we hoped you'd say. We're establishing a specialized task force for this operation, drawing expertise from unconventional sources rather than limiting ourselves to traditional military protocols. The implication was significant, an operational approach that prioritized capability over credentials, expertise over hierarchy. It represented a fundamental shift from the institutional limitations that had defined Morgan's career. This task force will operate outside conventional command structures, the intelligence officer continued, reporting directly to Joint Special Operations Command with authorization to develop innovative methodologies beyond standard military doctrine. Commander Jackson stepped forward. Based on what we've witnessed during this operation, I'm recommending that Ms. Shepard serve as technical lead for the environmental analysis component, with operational authority beyond standard consultant parameters. Morgan recognized the magnitude of what was being proposed, not just inclusion in another mission, but structural acknowledgement of expertise that transcended traditional military qualification systems. It represented institutional evolution that could fundamentally change how specialized knowledge was integrated into operations. There's something else, the intelligence officer added, studying Morgan carefully. Given the extreme distance and atmospheric complexity, we need more than technical analysis. We need someone capable of executing the shot if necessary. The room fell silent as the implication became clear. They weren't just asking for her environmental expertise. They were suggesting she might be the actual shooter for a record-breaking engagement that would redefine military capability. My official qualifications don't include sniper certification, Morgan noted carefully. This task force isn't concerned with paperwork qualifications, the intelligence officer replied. We've been authorized to assign operational roles based on demonstrated capability rather than formal certification. After reviewing your classified file from Division 0, it's clear your expertise extends beyond environmental analysis to actual execution when required. Peterson stepped forward unexpectedly. Sir, I can confirm Ms. Shepard's capabilities firsthand. During our operation, her environmental reading made an impossible shot possible. Under even more extreme conditions, having the person who reads the atmosphere actually take the shot would maximize probability of success. Morgan appreciated his professional assessment, recognizing that he was putting mission requirements above ego or protocol, the hallmark of truly elite operators. The task force would include conventional military snipers, the intelligence officer clarified, but operational decisions would be based on capability rather than rank or certification. If conditions indicate you are the optimal shooter for a particular engagement, that option would be available. This represented everything Division 0 had embodied, but on an officially sanctioned platform, operational flexibility that valued expertise above bureaucracy when mission requirements demanded it. When does this task force activate? Morgan asked. Immediately, the intelligence officer replied. The situation is developing rapidly, and we need your environmental analysis capabilities as soon as possible." Commander Jackson approached Morgan directly. "This represents a significant departure from how we've historically integrated civilian expertise into military operations. Your performance during this mission demonstrated that some institutional limitations need reconsideration when they prevent optimal capability." Morgan nodded, understanding the professional significance of his statement. Jackson represented traditional military hierarchy. His acknowledgement that some protocols required evolution carried institutional weight beyond this single operation. "I'll provide whatever expertise the task force requires," she said simply. As the briefing concluded and personnel began preparations for the new operation, Peterson joined Morgan as she gathered her equipment. "This is bigger than a single mission," he observed quietly. "They're creating an operational structure that values your expertise without artificial limitations. That's unprecedented." Morgan considered the institutional significance. Throughout her career with Division 0, her capabilities had been utilized while her formal recognition remained constrained by bureaucratic parameters. This new task force represented potential structural evolution beyond individual accommodation. "Systems change when reality forces them to evolve," she replied. "Sometimes that requires demonstrating capabilities that existing protocols can't explain. Like hitting targets at distances conventional doctrine says are impossible?" Peterson smiled slightly. "Exactly," Morgan confirmed. "Institutional knowledge evolves when it encounters expertise that challenges established limitations." As they prepared for transport to the task force's operational center, Morgan reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. The impossible shot at 200 meters had been more than a tactical achievement. It represented a small but significant crack in institutional barriers that had limited how specialized expertise was integrated into military operations. Whether this evolution would extend beyond a single specialized task force remained to be seen. Bureaucracies resisted structural change, especially when it challenged established hierarchies and qualification systems. But in operational environments where lives and objectives hung in the balance, reality eventually forced institutional adaptation. The helicopter arrived to transport key personnel to the task force headquarters, its rotors cutting through mountain air with mechanical precision. As Morgan boarded alongside Peterson and selected operators from the SEAL team, she carried more than her specialized equipment. She carried the possibility that expertise might finally be valued for its operational impact, rather than its conformity to institutional parameters. The impossible shot had opened doors that bureaucracy had previously kept firmly closed. The question now was whether those doors would remain open long enough for structural change to take root, for systems to evolve beyond artificial limitations that separated technical knowledge from operational application. As the helicopter lifted off, carrying them toward a mission that would push beyond even the remarkable achievement they'd just completed, Morgan knew that some barriers fell only when someone proved they were illusions rather than absolute limitations. She had just proven that shots considered impossible by military doctrine could become achievable through specialized expertise. Now she would determine whether institutional barriers could fall with equal certainty when confronted with operational reality that demanded evolution beyond conventional thinking. The mountain range fell away beneath them as they flew toward challenges that would test not just ballistic limitations, but institutional willingness to adapt when existing structures proved insufficient for mission requirements. Morgan Shepherd had spent her career making impossible shots possible. Now she might help make impossible institutional change equally achievable. The Joint Special Operations Task Force headquarters was unlike any military facility Morgan had ever encountered. Located in a classified mountain complex, it represented the bleeding edge of operational innovation, a place where conventional military boundaries dissolved in service to mission requirements that demanded exceptional capabilities. Morgan stepped from the helicopter into a hive of focused activity. Intelligence analysts, special operators, and technical specialists moved with purpose through a facility designed for rapid planning and execution of unconventional missions. What immediately struck her was the absence of traditional military rigidity. Personnel from different branches and specializations collaborated without the hierarchical barriers she'd grown accustomed to navigating. "Welcome to Pinnacle," said a silver-haired woman approaching with quiet authority. "I'm Director Harlow. I oversee this task force." Morgan recognized the name immediately. Catherine Harlow was legendary in intelligence circles. a former field operative who had risen through rank not through political maneuvering but through operational excellence. Her presence confirmed the significance of whatever mission was developing. "The team from Nevada briefed me on your performance," Harlow continued, leading Morgan through security checkpoints toward the facility's operational center. 3. 200 meters in complex mountain conditions. Impressive. "The SEAL team performed admirably," Morgan replied with professional modesty. Harlow smiled slightly. "They did. But we both know the shot would have been impossible without your environmental analysis. That's precisely why you're here." They entered a secure briefing room where a diverse team was already assembled, special operators from various military branches, intelligence analysts, and technical specialists whose backgrounds defied easy categorization. Morgan noted that standard military uniform conventions were relaxed, with personnel dressed for functional requirements rather than branch identification. "Our unconventional structure sometimes surprises people with traditional military backgrounds," Harlow noted, observing Morgan's assessment. "Pinnacle operates differently. We value expertise above rank, capability above credentials. Results matter more than protocols." It sounded remarkably like Division Zero's operational philosophy, though that unit had existed in shadows without official sanction. Pinnacle appeared to represent similar principles, but with institutional authorization at the highest levels. "I appreciate operational flexibility," Morgan replied carefully. "Good," Harlow nodded. "Because what we're attempting goes beyond conventional military parameters in every respect." The director activated a secure holographic display showing complex topographical data of a mountainous region that made their previous operation look simple by comparison. Extreme elevation changes created microclimates that would generate atmospheric conditions of unprecedented complexity. "Our objective requires a precision engagement at 3,800 meters, Harlow explained, highlighting a specific location on the display. "Environmental conditions include multiple converging weather systems, elevation-induced pressure differentials, and atmospheric turbulence that defeats standard ballistic calculations entirely." Morgan studied the environmental data with professional focus. The conditions were dauntingly complex, layered atmospheric systems creating invisible barriers that would make conventional shooting methodology useless at such extreme range. "Every ballistic computer and military expert says reliable engagement at this distance under these conditions is impossible," Harlow continued. "Standard doctrine places the maximum effective range for precision shooting at 2,500 meters. We're looking at 3,800 in environmental conditions that would challenge shots at half that distance." "Challenging," Morgan acknowledged, "but not necessarily impossible with proper environmental analysis." Harlow nodded approvingly. "That's exactly why you're here. Your work with Division Zero demonstrated capabilities beyond conventional parameters. We need that expertise for this operation." The direct reference to her classified background in an official briefing was jarring. Division Zero's existence remained officially unacknowledged in most military circles. "Director," Morgan said carefully, "that unit's operations remain classified." "Not in this room," Harlow replied. "Pinnacle has unrestricted access to compartmentalized intelligence. Everyone here has appropriate clearances." She activated another display showing operational data that Morgan instantly recognized. Mission parameters from Division Zero operations that had achieved shots at distances military doctrine deemed impossible. Morgan's name appeared directly in the technical analysis sections, her contributions clearly documented despite the classified nature of the operations. "Your expertise was instrumental in achieving these results," Harlow noted. "Yet official recognition was constrained by bureaucratic limitations. Physical qualification standards, certification requirements, institutional boundaries between technical support and operational execution." Morgan maintained professional composure despite her surprise at seeing her classified work openly acknowledged in an official setting. Throughout her career, institutional barriers had kept her contributions in shadows, while operators received recognition for achievements her expertise had made possible. "Pinnacle exists to eliminate artificial boundaries between expertise and application," Harlow continued. "Our mission parameters exceed conventional capabilities, requiring operational structures that value specialized knowledge without bureaucratic constraints." The implications were significant, not just for this specific mission, but for military doctrine more broadly. Pinnacle represented institutional evolution beyond traditional limitations, acknowledging that some operational requirements demanded flexibility that conventional structures couldn't provide. The mission timeline is compressed, Harlow explained, returning to the topographical display. Our window opens in 72 hours and remains viable for approximately 40 minutes. We need your environmental analysis capabilities immediately to determine whether engagement is genuinely possible under these conditions. Morgan nodded, already examining the complex atmospheric data. I'll need specialized equipment deployed to the region for proper environmental reading. Standard military sensors won't detect the atmospheric layers that affect extreme-range ballistics. Already arranged, Harlow confirmed. A forward team is establishing an observation post at the potential shooting position. Your specialized equipment is being transported there now, with technical specifications you provided during the Nevada operation. The operational tempo was impressively efficient, a reflection of Pinnacle's unconventional structure prioritizing capability over procedure. In traditional military operations, such rapid deployment of specialized civilian equipment would have required multiple authorization layers and procedural delays. One more thing, Harlow added with deliberate significance. This operation requires more than environmental analysis. If engagement proves viable, we need someone capable of executing under these exceptional conditions. Morgan understood immediately what was being suggested. You want me to potentially take the shot. We want the person with the highest probability of success to take the shot, Harlow clarified. If that's you based on environmental expertise and demonstrated capability, then operational requirements take precedence over conventional qualification standards. This represented a fundamental departure from military doctrine, assigning operational roles based on capability rather than formal certification. Throughout Morgan's career, institutional barriers had prevented her from officially executing shots her expertise had made possible. Other operators had pulled triggers while her environmental analysis remained unacknowledged background support. Your file from Division 0 indicates you've personally executed shots beyond conventional parameters when operational necessity required it, Harlow noted. Your accuracy records at extreme range exceed documented military achievements, though those records remain classified. Morgan maintained professional neutrality despite the unprecedented acknowledgement of capabilities that had previously been constrained by institutional limitations. I have done what missions required when circumstances demanded flexibility. That's precisely the approach Pinnacle was established to formalize, Harlow replied, recognizing that some operational requirements transcend conventional structures. As the briefing concluded, Morgan was introduced to the team assembled for the mission, an elite cadre selected for specialized expertise rather than traditional qualifications. Director Harlow observed from the back of the room, her presence confirming the program's significance within evolving military doctrine. Following the 800-meter operation, Pinnacle had been authorized to establish specialized training protocols integrating unconventional expertise into formal military capability development. The limitations we've accepted aren't physical constants but knowledge boundaries, Morgan explained to operators selected for their exceptional potential. With proper environmental reading, shots considered impossible become achievable through specialized expertise properly applied. As the training program progressed, Morgan worked directly with operators who demonstrated particular aptitude for environmental reading. Among them was Peterson, whose natural intuition for atmospheric conditions had earned him selection as an instructor candidate to help propagate specialized knowledge throughout military special operations. The institutional evolution is remarkable, he noted during an evening review session. 6 months ago, your expertise was utilized but constrained by qualification parameters that had nothing to do with operational capability. Now it's being formally integrated into doctrine development. Morgan nodded thoughtfully. Systems evolve when operational reality demonstrates artificial limitations. The 800-meter engagement proved capability existed beyond conventional parameters if specialized expertise was properly utilized. The training program represented more than individual recognition. It embodied institutional acknowledgement that some operational requirements transcended traditional structures. Expertise was increasingly being valued for its capability contribution rather than its conformity to certification standards that sometimes excluded unconventional knowledge. On the program's final day, Director Harlow addressed the graduating operators with characteristic directness. This specialized training represents evolution beyond conventional doctrine. You've been selected to integrate this knowledge into your respective units, expanding operational capabilities beyond traditional limitations. She gestured toward Morgan with professional acknowledgement. Miss Shepard's expertise demonstrates that some limitations exist, only because institutional thinking hasn't evolved to overcome them. Your mission is to continue that evolution, ensuring specialized knowledge is properly integrated into operational capability. As the program concluded and operators returned to their respective units, Morgan reflected on the journey that had brought specialized expertise from institutional shadows into doctrinal evolution. The impossible shot at 3,800 meters had been more than an operational achievement. It represented a crack in artificial barriers that had constrained unconventional knowledge within traditional military structures. "What's next?" Peterson asked as they reviewed plans for future training programs. "You've helped establish institutional recognition for capabilities previously constrained by outdated parameters. Where does that evolution lead?" Morgan considered the question thoughtfully. Throughout her career, she'd focused on making impossible shots possible without concern for institutional acknowledgement. Now that specialized expertise was being formally integrated into military capability development, new possibilities emerged for operational evolution beyond conventional limitations. "There are always new barriers to overcome," she replied. "Some physical, some institutional. The key is recognizing which limitations are real constants, and which exist only because we haven't yet developed the expertise to transcend them." The specialized training facility continued operating beyond official acknowledgement, developing capabilities that expanded military doctrine beyond traditional parameters. Morgan Shepard had spent her career making impossible shots possible through expertise that transcended conventional limitations. Now that expertise was helping make impossible institutional evolution equally achievable, creating operational structures that valued specialized knowledge based on capability rather than certification. Because some barriers existed only until someone proved they were illusions rather than absolute limitations. And sometimes the most important shots weren't the ones that reached impossible targets, but the ones that demonstrated institutional evolution beyond artificial constraints, when operational reality demanded capabilities that conventional thinking deemed impossible. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.